Alright, this verse is to sort of catch up with the weeks I've been missing. I figured we'd go a bit simple, so I settled on these, I guess you could say either sports-themed romance movies or romance-themed sports movies, whichever. I definitely think it's much more of a sports-themed romance movie for both of them. One of which just happens to be one of the most famous movies and most quoted movies of the 90s, and the other was this, nice one that kind of came and went, but to critical acclaim, and, audiences loved it and all that, and was popular at the time, but I haven't really heard anything much about it since 2005 when it came out, so we'll give it a bit of a revisit. Despite the fact that it's a remake of another movie entirely, but we'll start with Jerry Maguire, which is interesting from the start because obviously our writer and director is Cameron Crowe, and the movie is a bit, I don't know if you can say autobiographical in the way that Fever Pitch was for Nick Hornby, but to my understanding, it was the whole thing of a few months back, or however long ago it was, we talked about Singles, and the fact that Singles didn't really do so well after Crowe had such, big hits like, Say Anything to his name, and was kind of really became synonymous with that whole romance comedy, going into adulthood style. And he apparently had this realization when Singles more or less failed, if you want to call it that. That he had a lot of friends who left and some who stayed, and there was this whole thing of when he started off really successful and then kind of hit a bit of a bottom, and it was like who was going to be there and who he could trust and all that, and who was going to stick by him. You can pretty much see how this storyline came to be very, very clearly. So we start off seeing him, completely on the top, the whole starting with literally the world and then coming down, with him narrating that sort of fast-talking Tom Cruise way of his that just kind of reeks of this character is like a total and complete success, even if he has to like practically sell his soul and all that, and he's just this, sort of part of this, soulless machine of, this sports agency, and how it's pretty much all about, the money aspect and getting them to be rich and famous and all that, and not much of anything else. Nothing particularly human about the whole process. So eventually he becomes face-to-face with that when a player is injured, and he has a run-in with his son, who is Nickelodeon fans from the late 90s and early 2000s will recognize as a very young Drake Bell, who confronts Jerry in the hallway and says, like, is he going to be okay? And of course, when Jerry is only concerned about him making money and playing, this kid says, fuck you, and flips him off. And it's about this point that Jerry realizes where he stands. And it took a kid telling him this. So he has this whole breakdown and basically unleashes everything in this write-up that's saying everything that managers or agents really shouldn't be saying. And to the point that he is seen as such this sort of figure in this industry, but at the same time to show you kind of the back and forth of it, at first he's embraced in a way that is actually really well done on Crowe's part, because the way this scene is revealed when he walks in thinking he's totally shit the bed, he's met with applause from the whole room, and it's to this point to where it's like, it almost feels like a fantasy sequence. Just this whole room of clapping people for something he did that was totally insane. And you have Donald Logue off to the side saying, like, how long is it going to last? Like, a few days? So I like the way that it basically had the feel of a fantasy sequence, because it was the whole how short-lived it's going to be and how much everybody knows how short-lived it's going to be, this glory that he's found, and how much he's going to absolutely hit rock bottom because of doing this. And to go into this, to playing this guy that is just at the absolute bottom of his career, that has absolutely, like, nobody left. The whole idea was, I think it was supposed to be Tom Hanks, and then by the time, it took him like 3 years or 3.5 years to write the script, and by that point he thought Tom Hanks was too old. So he went to Cruise, and I guess people told him, like, Cruise is never going to play a loser, he's way too, superstar-like. But apparently Cruise was, like, all over this. Like, he was desperately wanting to play a character that was just, like, just completely manic and off the rails, and just has nowhere to go but up, because he's just not just on, he's just not at rock bottom. He is like in the Earth's core kind of rock bottom. And he's got such this. You would think playing a character that is so, especially in a Cameron Crowe movie, you'd almost expect him to be like a guy that, you know, gets all sort of mopey because he's at the bottom. He's going to get all depressed and all that. But for this character that has every reason to just be depressed and mopey and not doing anything, this is like probably one of Cruise's most energetic and lively performances, which really says something. And the fact that he's able to maintain this like throughout, he's just like this live wire from beginning to end, whether he's in a good place or a bad place or a worse place. It's like kind of the worse off he is, the more manic and energetic he is, which is what makes this performance so great. And the way he is able to kind of, you know, have, I don't know about subtleties, but he's able to downplay some scenes to where Jerry does very much feel like a human character, or a character that's just discovered his humanity, while still being able to play it just totally off the wall most of the time. And then we introduce, you know, a few characters here and there. There's two main ones. Obviously we've got some nice side characters here that add some, you know, energy of their own to the story, like Kelly Preston as Avery, the, you know, very aggressive sexual companion to him that it will be probably the first person to drop him. He tries to drop her, but she's very quick to sort of go in that direction already when it's clear that he's not going to be the success he once was. She's very much like, comes off like a conniving person like that, which Kelly Preston plays insanely well, given how she, a lot of time, at least as far as the ones I remember, usually plays characters that are like very, you know, sort of sweet and unassuming. Just to sort of take on a character like this, even if for the small amount of time that she's there, it feels like a really nice change of pace. And stuff like, you know, like The Nanny, where it's like you've got it's a Cameron Crowe movie, so you have to fit in the music somehow, so of course the nanny character is going to be a jazz enthusiast. So it's like, even when, you know, because obviously I said Cameron Crowe has the romance down to a T, but just kind of those little things also, just kind of just his last signature. It's really nice to see those in there also. But then you have like the other big character in the movie, Rod Tidwell, who is Cuba Gooding Jr., who obviously won an Oscar for this, supporting actor in '96. And it's one of those cases where sometimes when you go back and you watch an Oscar-winning performance, you're like, you know, how did that win? Or like, why did it beat this, or why did it beat that? But it's like, this is one of those performances where I think anybody looks back on it, and even if they don't agree, maybe they thought somebody else should have won, it's sort of like, yeah, I could see somebody winning an Oscar for this, sure, definitely. And I think one thing that helps that a lot, it's a great performance throughout, and there are a number of things he gets to do with it, especially towards the end when it becomes a much more emotional performance. I think it helps a lot that Rod Tidwell's introductory scene, his very first scene in this movie, is probably undoubtedly one of the most famous movie scenes of all time. I don't know who can argue with that. So the whole Show Me the Money scene, obviously. But the thing about this scene also is another one of its Oscar nominations was editing, and I feel like, once again, this scene plays a lot into that, where it's bouncing around. We're still kind of playing a beat the clock thing, because it's like Jerry's running out of clients as Bob Sugar's kind of taking them all away and directing them off to somewhere else. Just kind of being a backstabbing piece of shit. Which Jay, more interestingly enough, plays very well as well. But as he's doing this, it's like, as long as he hangs on to this one client. Because the interesting thing about Cuba Gooding Jr.'s performance here, and the character himself, is when you watch him in this scene, and you see the way it builds into him just sort of, you know, doing his fast-talking thing, which eventually leads into the Show Me the Money thing, where we're just cutting back and forth, and he's, like, really getting into it, and then that one, I mean, it's, the great thing about it is how famous the line is, but how funny it is when it's said for most of the time. It's only that one final time Cruise said it is the one that, like, everybody remembers. But up till then, it was, like, it's a hilarious scene. You're My Motherfucker is kind of the cherry on the top for me in regards to that scene. But the thing about this, in regards to Gooding's performance in this scene compared to the rest of the movie, is even though he's talking about, like, his waterbed commercials or whatever it is, that sponsorship that he hates, when we watch Tidwell in this scene, he has, like, a superstar personality. Like, when we first kind of see him, it's sort of like we think as long as Jerry has this guy, oh, he's good to go because this guy is like the ultimate. But it's like he sells that so well that we don't realize until later in the movie that he's just like this player that nobody's really paying attention to. Like he's the player that might as well barely be there. Like his plays aren't really, you know, they don't. He's not really there doing the plays to get all the attention. He's not, you know, the one that's doing all the big commercials and all that. It's always these shitty sponsorships or whatever. But he had such a superstar personality in the first scene. We don't really realize that right away. And it's only when we see him, you know, get overlooked by the kid that thinks he's Darius Rucker or whatever, that we realize that this is maybe not so good for Jerry. But at the same time, there is a whole plot thread here about the fact that Tidwell did hang on to him. Even though he did threaten to take Bob Sugar's call, still, it's kind of like he was always kind of there. He just had to do the show me the money thing to convince him that he really, really wanted him. So it kind of ends up turning into this whole thing of a friendship between them, because there is, because not only is he just overshadowed by everything else, but specifically the Jerry O'Connell character in particular, to where it's like they're really kind of holding on to each other because each other is kind of really what they have. They're the only ones giving attention to each other at this rate. So they kind of need each other, but there's also like a genuine friendship there that we see as the movie goes on. And eventually when it gets to that point at the end, when it's like, when they're like crying after the big game and they're like hugging each other and he like thanks him and all that, and it puts Jerry in an entirely different place also. It's like, it pretty much is summed up by the ending of It's a Wonderful Life, where Clarence, you know, leaves the book behind and writes in it, no man is a failure who has friends. And it's like this kind of when, obviously when he met Renee Zellweger, which is the whole other thing we're going to go into, but just him still having Rod was like, as long as Rod was still there, Jerry wasn't a failure. And that connection they have. But the fact that there's also like a real friendship there also, like they're even there for like, you know, the birth of Regina King's, you know, child, their child. And it's, yeah, and that's the thing too that's interesting is now we go into the Renee Zellweger character, and it's like when you think about scenes like Cruise singing Tom Petty in his car, or when they have to frantically leave lunch to go have a baby and all that, it's like, it's so abundantly clear that this is a PG-13 romantic comedy, just kind of underneath the shell of an R-rated sports movie, is what's going on here. So with the Zellweger character, complete with the cute child played by Jonathan Lipnicki, of course, just to really add on that extra layer of romantic comedy. There is something about this immediately, where once again, it's all about the people that are going to stick by him. And in this, obviously we see her, like, watching him from a distance for a while. This may be something that, while the movie still holds up in regards to, like, people still quoting it and saying it's this ultimate romance movie, I can see today's audience as being a bit more critical about the idea of her character basically watching him from a distance long before they like really meet formally and have a romance and all that. It's a lot of just her watching him from a distance and crushing on him, and sort of maybe people would dismiss it as like, you know, giving a stalkery vibe or whatever. But in at least 1996, it had very much this classic romantic comedy feel to it, which you can tell is what Crowe is going for. And here it's like that scene when he's finally leaving and he reaches that ultimate embarrassing moment where he fumbles with the goldfish on his way out, just as his last fuck you. But then finally, at the very last minute, she walks out with him despite how much she could really use steadiness, especially having a kid by herself. She's got Bonnie Hunt, her sister, and all the, I guess, the divorced women's group or whatever, but even so, she is in this spot that's kind of alone. And then once again, they manage to find that they do have each other even in these moments before it's even a romance thing yet. Well, it's probably, from her looks, we get the idea it's probably always a romance thing with her, but you get it. And so you have these moments also where it's like, it is interesting to see that this is basically at its heart just another cheesy romantic comedy, just happened to make a shitload of money, just happened to get a Best Picture nomination and Cruise, you know, Best Actor nomination on top of Gooding's win, and the screenplay and the editing as well. But it does kind of feel like there is something else to it, even if it does have, you know, those scenes, like I said, the cute kid scene, like when when they're in the car and they're like comparing facts. But there's something, whether it be Cruise's presence and the casting of Lipnicki and all that, and apparently a lot of their dialogue was ad-libbed, because Crow just kind of wanted it to feel natural. I guess the human head weighs 8 pounds thing was just something Lipnicki was saying around the set, and they decided to make that the starting point and go from there. So there is definitely that natural feel to it also, but there's just something like just so undeniably charming about it. It's like you can try and be cynical towards this, but it's like, kind of good luck. But it's, I mean, maybe some people will see it as like a product of the '90s, and it will be easy for them to do that. But I don't know. I still think it's in there. So, and there is also the every now and then they do kind of try to put in like the realism factor, which makes the romance a bit more relatable, and the clumsiness of it makes it more charming. So you have like the moment when they're gonna kiss for the first time on her front porch, and it's like he sort of like leans in this weird way, and we think it's just gonna be this total fail until she pulls him in, and then it becomes romantic again quickly. Then her dress malfunctions, and then all that other stuff. But it does end up working quite well, despite seeming like it might be just this cliche romantic comedy at heart, which honestly may be what won a lot of people over. It's like, it is this really good sports movie that just has like this really cheesy cliche, yet well written and well performed love story at its heart. And I think a lot of it has to do also with what Renee Zellweger brings, how she's just got like this really effortless charm about her, the way she makes it, because this character could have been like way too sort of, I guess since it's Crow, we might as well talk about the whole, like, he basically practically created the Manic Pixie Dream Girl cliche. It's like she could have been something like that, maybe somebody a bit too cutesy or a bit too klutzy or whatever, but she feels just real enough and just charming enough that their romance totally works from beginning to end, even with the dialogue, which has now been quoted for years and years since it came out, has a lot to do with, the delivery from the two of them. Particularly her with some of the more juicy ones. I think she said that when she read "You Have Me at Hello," she thought it was a typo because it didn't make any sense to her. So it is a quote that I'm almost kind of surprised took off, because it's one you kind of have to think about for a second for it to make sense, because it doesn't really have context in the scene itself. But even so, they did find a way to make it work and make it like forever legendary in the romantic comedy genre and quoted in romance movies and all that other stuff forever. But then you also have stuff like when they get there's a really interesting sort of setup here with the way they set up kind of her loneliness and her desire for romance in her life, while he's also desperate to find some balance in his. But the way she sort of that old cliche also where she sees all the couples around and it's sort of making her want that even more. But there's one in particular, and it's when they're at the airport after they drop him off, and her and Lipnicki are just watching him go. And I don't even know if this is what Crow's intention was. And obviously it's not something that you just know. I had to it's something I read. But obviously that couple that meets, where the couple come together and then they got the kid and they all come together and it's their meeting, and like she's looking at that like saying, that's what I want, that's what I would love to have in my life. Apparently, the couple and the kid in that scene that they're watching are the stand-ins for Tom Cruise, Renee Zellweger, and Lipnicki. So it's like it's still like a version of them that she's looking at. And it's like I always wondered if that was like his actual intention, or it was just like, hey, you guys are here, do this moment. But it is kind of nice that it's like an actual sort of mirror in a way of what she wants and what she hopes to get out of potentially this whole thing with Jerry. So... and then obviously it does take, some interesting curves in regards to romantic comedy cliches, like the fact that they get married in the middle of the movie instead of the end, and how conflicts come sort of after that instead of before, and how it's kind of the woman that's pursuing the guy, and when it's usually the other way around in romantic comedies. So he's still making, like, a cheesy cliche romantic comedy, but he's still kind of making his own little curves in here as he tells it. And like I said, but with the story that surrounds it and the performances and the cast and all that, it's still totally its own thing, and you can easily tell watching it how it just exploded into this monumental thing in movie history. So, and obviously the script is just full of dialogue that became like instant classics throughout. Whether it be the more romantic stuff like the "you have me at hello" and stuff like that, "you complete me" and all that, then stuff to like show you the money, then to stuff like shoplifting the pony or whatever it was, just stuff like that. So apparently people still run up to Cuba Gooding Jr. and say that, so he's got that to look forward to forever. The "help me help you" scene, like almost every single scene has a piece of dialogue that's been kind of quoted forever since it came out. Some of which you may not even think right away to associate with the movie, where you go back and watch it and you're like, oh yeah, that's where that came from. So yeah, and that's so yeah, and the fact that it was able to kind of rise above being just a romantic comedy or just a sports movie or whatever, and it's able to kind of combine both and be both, and sort of uplifting in both ways, where like it doesn't necessarily feel like. I mean, after a while, it does feel more like a romance movie than a sports movie, but still, it does both well enough that it really works. And apparently, its depiction of the sports agency world is, at least I hear, like extremely accurate. So there's that also. So yeah, like it is. I mean, maybe it is a little too long. It's like almost 2 hours and 20 minutes. And like I said, the whole angle of them like getting married in the middle and all that will kind of like it's when they get married when the movie kind of starts to feel like it's getting pretty long. But still, the places it goes after that are just still irresistible anyway. So that's pretty much where I stand with that. Now going on to Fever Pitch. Which is apparently called, The Perfect Catch in the UK, because it's a remake of the movie from 1997, I think, with Colin Firth, which is about football in that instance, their football, not this football. And so, and they're both, I think, surrounded by, like, these actual real-life sporting events. And like I said, I'm pretty sure the book it's based on was autobiographical in regards to Hornby, but obviously they changed it to baseball here. And it's brought to us by, of all people, the Farrelly brothers. You're coming fresh off their more raunchy movies, like There's Something About Mary and Me, Myself, and Irene and stuff like that. Obviously, Dumb and Dumber and Kingpin in the past at this point. And also with Peter Farrelly having a movie in the Oscar race right now, I figured why not appropriate to put a Farrelly movie against a movie that did very well Oscar-wise. So, once again, much like Jerry Maguire, it does have a very sort of cliche romantic comedy at its heart, but much more so in this. Where Jerry Maguire kind of eventually got to that point kind of gradually, and the characters sort of worked out getting to that point. Fever Pitch, like, up and down, is just a cliche romantic comedy from beginning to end. The question is if it's able to make its material work, even so. Because it can be a bit annoying when it starts. And we meet the same characters we always meet. We've got the Jimmy Fallon character, who is, the sloppy guy who loves sports way too much, is obsessed with it. His sports memorabilia just, like, covers all the rooms in his house and all that. And he's, like, when he gets, the tickets, the season tickets, it's this big ceremonial thing where he has a friend that's an anesthesiologist that leaves the hospital to come for this moment where they just open the tickets when the package gets here. It is very endearing when he like hugs the delivery guy and everything, but still, he's that character, which is the total opposite of the Drew Barrymore character, who is the busy businesswoman who walks around frantically with her assistant, who has no life of her own and just runs around getting her coffee and shit and telling her what her schedule is. And she, walks around on the phone saying, like, I need data reports, stat, stuff like that. It's almost exact dialogue. And when you see introductions of characters like this, you're just like, oh, this shit again. How fun. We've only seen this 100 billion times before. Great. Let's see if this thing has anything else to offer. And sure enough, it continues with the cliches. They both have their very generic best friends. She's got her group of friends where she's like, oh, he's definitely got something wrong with him. There's a reason he's single. And he and his friends are talking about, like, is he going to get laid? Is she hot? Or whatever the hell. And they kind of do this back and forth. I do wonder if the fact that, speaking of Cameron Crowe, Ione Skye is one of the friends of Drew Barrymore, and it's like, was she cast to kind of try to give off the vibe of, hey, remember stuff like, Say Anything and the Rachel Papers and stuff like that, like the romantic movies back in the day? Is she going to kind of try to bring that over and, like, it's going to, like, she's going to, like, rub off on this movie or something, despite the fact that she's just playing a best friend character? I don't know, but because she really doesn't do much, despite being such a a jarringly recognizable face just kind of being in the background. So, especially if you're a fan of romance movies, which you clearly must be if you're watching Fever Pitch, but whatever. So, the interesting thing, though, that works about Fever Pitch is the fact that it doesn't seem like it's gonna work at the start. It's one of those cases where it's kind of, looks are kind of deceiving in regards to, you feel like you have a hold on a movie and you know what kind of vibe it's going for, and then you just sort of, it just kind of goes in that direction and never wins you over because immediately you saw through it immediately. Because it does have a very rocky start. Like, the whole first date scene, I can see where people probably would find it charming, but it's really never worked for me at all. Where, like, first off, it's like, seems to be no real grip on him as a character. Where it's like, when he's taking the kids to see her, and he's like, hey, I got a crowbar under my seat and I'm gonna use it. And it's like, oh, so he's like a typical sort of like that Boston kind of guy, like that Boston stereotype of I'm gonna kick your ass or whatever it is they say. And so it's like, no, he's only like that in that one scene, and he's never like that again. Because he's Jimmy Fallon, he's not gonna be some tough guy, obviously. But then when he goes to meet her again, it's like this businesswoman whose life has been consumed by work, all he has to do is walk in there and ask her out, and that is all it takes. That's it. But the thing is that right before he gets to that, she's saying like, a position just opened up and we all want it, so it's about to get real murderous up in here. And he does this really embarrassing thing where he's like, oh yeah, and it's like, he imitates like the Psycho music and says, he does this thing, it's really embarrassing. So it's like, is he really smooth, or is he a total spaz? Because he's both in this scene at once. Yet somehow manages to score this date. So it's like, that just kind of was this confusing way of like, who is this character? And it's like, maybe they're trying to make it realistic that he doesn't just have one trait, he has both of those traits, but it's like, I don't know, it just seems like she was so put off by like, oh, maybe this guy's a spaz, maybe I won't do that. But then there's no her saying yes to the date, it's just a cut, and we're supposed to assume she said yes, and that's where the movie goes off on. And then there's the whole thing where when he shows up, she's got like food poisoning, and she keeps puking, and then he like cleans up her bathroom, and he takes her to bed, and like, they've met each other twice. I'm going to assume either they confirmed it right then, any other communication must have been probably over the phone, but then again, maybe not, because it's been told to us that he doesn't have a cell phone. So maybe he used his baseball glove phone, whatever the hell he had, and they confirmed their date or whatever, which would mean the first time they met each other, they were total strangers. Him showing up to her house for the date is the second time they've met each other, after being strangers the first time. So, maybe I'm jumping to conclusions, or maybe I'm being too touchy when I think it's a little bit weird and soon. Like, maybe not weird, but the soonness of it is what's weird. When she's sick and he decides to help her out of her dress and into like a nightgown. And it's like, obviously it goes into the scene of, oh, she's naked underneath, oh, he better not look, and then it's like, oh, yep, I totally looked, I'm being honest and charming. But it's like, is it not weird that the second time they meet each other, he thinks that putting her in a nightgown is a responsibility that he needs to, go after? I don't know, that kind of always was weird to me. And then the fact that he, like, hangs out and brushes her dog's teeth and sleeps on her couch while she's unconscious and sick, I don't know. I feel like she should be a bit more, like, you're awfully, you're really putting yourself in my life, like, really damn fast. Like I said, the last time we met each other, we were strangers. But this is the starting point of the romance. So, as I was saying, this should destroy the movie. This should be, like, the movie should not work from now on because this opening was so damn misguided and weird and sudden and makes his character not seem as charming as he's probably supposed to be. Yet somehow, the way the movie tells its story, where it kind of skips past the rest of the whole, hey, we're just getting to know each other stuff, and so we're skipping to farther into their relationship because this is where the real problem's going to be. And the fact that we just get a glimpse of it and a feel of it, that they spent enough time together, that the relationship has found its comfort, and we can actually get to what the movie's about. It's kind of like you kind of admire the let's skip the bullshit because we know what we have to get into. We're not going to drag this out or make it over long, but it's just enough to establish how they'll feel about each other. It's not like skipping over everything, and it's this jarring way of just telling us now, oh, they're in this. We do get to see just enough in that little montage that gets us to this point when baseball season comes in and is obviously going to come between them. And it's from this point on, the rest of the movie works and totally saves itself from that really shitty beginning and the introduction to this relationship, and it somehow really wins us over. And obviously a lot of it, probably has to do with them, in their chemistry, the Fallon Barrymore chemistry, and there's something about Fallon here in particular that's like, this should be a character that we just immediately are put off by. I think me not being a sports fan in the slightest, I almost feel like my initial reaction usually would have probably been to say, this guy really needs to grow up. It's like, how is he ever going to maintain a relationship with her? Why would she want a relationship with this? But the fact that he can play the character so likable, but not only that, even as me watching, as a total and complete non-sports fan, watching him describe why it means so much to him. Not just because, his family member introduced it to him and then died and he's gone ever since, but the way he describes how he feels about it. It's sort of like the videos we've been putting out recently about awards season. The way I talk about awards season, I could relate to him, how he was talking about the Red Sox and how he's been following every single thing and every single game they play is a really, really big deal, especially since he goes to them. And just the way that he wins us over at the same time he's winning her over. And that's the thing, though, is that we can also see from a mile away how this is going to be a conflict, but it's that way that he wins us and her over that's what makes the movie works, where it doesn't feel like it's just we're waiting for the cliche conflict. We know it's coming, but we're interested in them enough now to watch what happens until the conflict gets here, and then how they're going to deal with it when the conflict gets here. Because obviously in the worst romantic comedies, you're just waiting for the conflict because you know it's coming, you know it's going to be mundane, you know it's going to be easily solvable, and they're just going to drag it out. And then as soon as they figure it out, the movie's going to end. It's not going to matter. But this movie does do that in a much more skillful way also. And also they do it in a way to where, at first, the way they introduce us to his total mania of it. It's... For a while there, they played the obsession off as, comedic. When... Especially in the moments, when she's watching TV with her dad, and she gets to see him in his true fanboy form for the first time, and her dad's just who's that asshole? God forbid we ever meet a guy like that. As she shrinks inside herself. But there's also a way that once he does win us over like that, it is very easy to see from her perspective also. How we kind of are able to see both arguments, even though it is much easier to be on her side and say, obviously there's much more important things, for instance, the people that love you, in regards to this thing. But in certain scenes, when the big conflict comes in, when they go to the Gatsby party, and he misses that really, really big game, which is the biggest comeback ever, and it was the fact that this is the first game he's missed ever, to go to all those games for all those years and miss something like this. Even though we had the really nice scene and we totally feel her pain that he was here in the moment saying baseball's just a game, saying all he needs is her, all he wants is her. He doesn't need to be there. All he needs to be is here in bed with her. We can feel his pain. And we can feel how upset he is to know that after going to all of those games for all his life, he missed that one in particular. it's like you can see it from her stance where it's like, what is the big deal? But because we've seen his passion, he's articulated it to a point that even non-sports fans can relate to it and understand it. We get where he's coming from. Like, we get, even after this really great night, this is something that could terribly, terribly upset him and just rip him apart inside. And it does make both characters sympathetic at the same time, despite the fact that we can both understand that, from one perspective, like, why is she not more understanding, but why is he not more, showing as much love to her as he does the game itself. And it's, yeah, a really well done character-wise. It's really surprising. And it also comes through in this way where it's like, I mean, obviously, every now and then there's like one little tiny raunchy joke, like the washing your father's balls thing. But for the most part, that's very much a Farrelly Brothers thing. But for the most part, it doesn't really feel like them. It's sort of like, this was like the time they kind of matured a little bit. It's like, it's almost weird. It's like, this almost seems like it was the path to Green Book. Because we had all the raunchiness, like Me, Myself, and Irene. I think Osmosis Jones was after that, and then we had this, where Osmosis Jones isn't like R-rated or anything, but it's fucking Osmosis Jones, you get it. So it's like, this was actually like sort of starting like a maturity, and then we could kind of see a little bit, especially with the way they handled their characters. And that's not to say that they hadn't reached that before, because I've obviously talked about at great length in another video how amazingly they turned the romantic comedy on its head with There's Something About Mary. There's Something About Mary is a masterful romantic comedy. That also just happens to be raunchy and have jizz jokes in it and stuff like that, but still extremely well done. And the fact that they were able to do that under like the sort of PG-13 label, but still able to do their thing, but sort of make this their own thing that doesn't have much of a same feel as the Colin Firth movie, despite having the exact same plots and coming from the same source material, but still, you can definitely see that and they're still, there's Fairly Brothers. It's like her getting knocked out with the ball is very similar to Warren in the batting cage, and There's Something About Mary, where she's just unconscious and they're celebrating and all that, which does eventually kind of turn into a serious moment where it is kind of her starting to realize where his priorities lie, and it does, like, even though it might be a funny scene, it does say a lot of negative things about his character, and we do know that, and I'm sure it eventually comes to him. But still, it is one of those cases where they are kind of a couple that it's a rare romantic comedy, believe it or not, where you do want to see them get together, even if we know how different they are. Because it's like, we do really, truly feel it at the end when he says, I'm giving up my tickets because what is this without her? And then her coming back in and saying, don't do that, this is, and the fact that they're able to come to that conclusion, even if, we can cynically say they probably didn't last. I mean, these are great gestures here, and it takes us on a great big romantic ending. They probably didn't last, but even so, I mean, if it is autobiographical, apparently this is somewhat true, so I don't know where exactly that went, but for the most part, I would say these two may not have lasted after the credits ended. But all that really matters is that they were able to find that ground where they both appreciated what they both wanted, and they both had such a love for each other, and the way she embraced, his passion for the sport and all that, and he embraced, her, I guess, need for this and all that, but, and her job also, that was a big player also, I almost forgot about, where she does have to be the busy, get these reports stat person, I guess, but even so, which is admirable for her character, just a huge romantic comedy cliche. But despite that, I mean, I think it's clear that J.M. Maguire wipes the floor with most movies like it, especially with having its own iconic status and stuff like that, but Fever Pitch still is worth checking out if you can get past that really shitty first 20 minutes or so, where it's just like, it seems like it's failing on all levels until it just remarkably saves itself as soon as the romance really starts to kick in. So yeah, so that's what this one is. The next one, I'm gonna probably try to do that one that I've been trying to do for like a month now, and then yeah, we're gonna go back into a theme for February, which is just more of Best Picture winners put up against other things, which might bore most people, but might as well. So it'll be the Oscar season and the award season. So yeah, so until all that stuff, that's it.